back to Through the Bible. We're going book by book through the whole Bible. We have arrived at the book of Ezra. Welcome to the book of Ezra. Fix this a little bit. All right, what do we know about Ezra? We should remember something about him from last time.
I remember nothing.
Did he potentially write the book? Wow.
Yes. We, according to tradition, Ezra's the guy who wrote 1st and 2nd Chronicles, or the Book of Chronicles, as it's just one big scroll. We divide it for convenience, I think. So now we have the book of Ezra, which, as you see up here, is combined, actually, originally combined, another one of these, with Nehemiah, and was divided later.
Really?
So, yes.
I didn't know that.
Yes. In some Bibles, it's actually called Ezra 1 and Ezra 2, or 1st Ezra and 2nd Ezra kind of thing.
Nehemiah is called 2nd Ezra?
Yeah.
Oh.
So these books very much go together, but they also kind of take a change, which we'll see when we study Nehemiah. Nehemiah is kind of written from this first person's perspective, but authorship credited to Ezra. But pretty much, we'll get to that, but used his kind of diary or something, notes, first person.
I was wondering how that would work since Nehemiah was
Yeah,
the first person.
exactly. So
He just wrote it
it's interesting.
as Nehemiah?
He must have taken sections out of Nehemiah's diary or notes or journal and written it first person from Nehemiah's perspective. Ezra isn't necessarily written from Ezra's perspective. Ezra is actually a scribe who studies. So he had access to all the books, like we talk about with how did he write First Chronicles? He wasn't there. He was studying the books and summarizing it and rewriting it in Babylon. So in Babylon. So we're at the time of the captivity. They were in captivity for 70 years after Israel got ransacked. And then, so timeline here is tough because you might know about Daniel, right? Daniel, kind of happened before all the way up to this time. So Daniel, we could have read Daniel next if we were staying in chronological order. We're going as our Western English Bible order is written.
I'm so linear. Can you give me some hot points?
We had all the kings, right? We studied all these kings after David. We had the northern kingdoms and all their mess got blown up by the Assyrians. And then we had the southern kingdom who kept in the line of David. Okay, so David's descendants, David, Solomon, Rehoboam.
Judah.
So the kingdom of Judah, which is how the people became known as Jews, Judah. Then we watched that video, some of you watched that video. How many good kings and how many bad kings in the southern kingdom of Judah?
I think it was for 1 and then 3 bad kings. 1 good king, 3 bad kings. Or might have been 1 good.
That's the ratio.
I think, yes.
It was
Luke?
8.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
Kings
And 8 good kings, 12 bad kings. So a mix, but generally headed in a bad direction with idol worship to the point where they were idols in the temple. They lost their Bible. And then in the time of Josiah, remember we talked about the retreat, they found it. So God had to judge this kingdom. So we are gonna, as we continue through the Bible, all these prophets and stuff, we're gonna be going back to these king times. So we are nearing the end of the Old Testament timeline biblical history with these books. And then we're going to be going back in with all the different prophets. So
Did you say 70 years of
70 years of captivity. And then, so in Babylon. And then, here's something big that happens right before this book is written. Babylon is conquered. So this nation that's conquered Judah has now been conquered by anybody know the country?
Rome?
No, not yet Rome.
Syria?
No, not yet Syria.
The Babylon?
The Syrians. The Persians.
Persians.
And then the Medes. No, the Medes come in later. I think they were together, yes. So the Persians conquer, okay? So we start the book of Ezra with, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but the first year of King Cyrus of Persia. So it's the first year because he just conquered Babylon. So we've got author Ezra, and it's a historical narrative. He's telling the story of history, and then first he's chronicling a bunch of information, and then we kind of get Ezra's story. Ezra is a scribe guy who ends up becoming a leader, which is pretty cool. So there is a change in the story when Ezra starts leading people, and he actually leads another return. So the audience, this is after all the return, so it's written, it's scribed down, it's recorded and distributed after Ezra and Nehemiah happen. So after the people have now 70 years of captivity, and then the people go back. So that's how Ezra starts. It records 2 trips back in Ezra and 1 more trip back in Nehemiah. So groups of people leave captivity and go back to Jerusalem. And so what's so cool is that this pagan king who's now conquered Babylon, so they have a new overthrower, looks at the people and God works in his heart. So it says in the first verse 1. Anyone read verse 1 for me?
I can.
Addie, read it.
In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, the king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put it in writing.
So God stirs in a pagan king's heart in his first year of reign of this new country that he took over to send the Jews back to their homeland. So he writes a proclamation sending them back. And did you catch that? Fulfilled in the words of Jeremiah, the prophecy of Jeremiah. We haven't read Jeremiah yet. It's further back in the Bible. But like timeline stuff, he prophesied that this was going to happen. We haven't read it yet in our timeline as we're going through the Bible. So when and where? We have 2 locations. We have Babylon and Jerusalem. Okay? So, and it records the travels from Babylon to Jerusalem. And then when, so the events of Ezra specifically, and then Nehemiah we're going to do on its own, are from 446 to 424 BC.
But I'm struggling with this. I didn't write this down because to me, how can it be written before it happens? Am I reading these dates weird?
Okay.
It says, mine says the book of Ezra never declares its author, and that part of it comes from Ezra's handwriting in first person, but some of it in third person, and then some events before Ezra's time.
Because it says I see written.
I did something wrong here.
Yeah, so I didn't write that down because it can't be right.
It was written shortly after the events of Nehemiah.
Okay, I have recording events between, this Bible says it differently. I should have grabbed the Bible I was reading out of it, the study Bible. 538 to 430 BC, written after 430 BC. That's what this one says.
Mine says written around 440 BC.
Okay, I have my written dates wrong here. So it was written right after the events. That's 446 to 424. Does that work too? 458 to 430? That's roughly the same. It's a longer amount of time. He wrote it after it all happened. All right, but I have
Okay, so I'll just write
539. Does that work? Oh, yeah, that's similar to this. Okay, so here's the events we have as far as when. 539 BC, 539 years before Jesus, Cyrus the Persian overthrows Babylon. Okay?
Mine says 538.
Okay, close enough. And then I have 1 year later, because it says in the first year, roughly, Cyrus decrees the Jews to return to Jerusalem in 538. Then we have our first return, and that is led by a guy named Zerubbabel. So also he's one of our main characters. Any guesses on who Zerubbabel is?
A dead guy.
He would, a natural leader, he is dead now, correct. A natural leader, might he be descended from?
David.
Yes. So, remember we ended Chronicles with, what was his name? There was a guy, no, Zedekiah? No, that was the last king. Or did we end, was that how kings ended? Kings ended with a king. So, the kings, the descendants of David have remained recognized. They're not kings when they're in exile, but remember one of the kings got to sit at Nebuchadnezzar's table. And so they have continued to track the line of David. Why is this important? Oh, here it is, at the end of Kings, I'm sorry.
When they go back.
Jehoiakim, that's his name. What? They need a king when they go back?
They don't technically need a king.
Sort of.
They want a king.
Okay, if you don't know, flip to Matthew chapter 1.
Ooh, genealogy time.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Flip to Matthew chapter 1. What is the name in verse 13? Zerubbabel. This guy in Ezra, okay? So, who is Jesus in the line of?
Zerubbabel?
Yes. And who is Zerubbabel in the line of? David. So it's important that the Messiah comes in the line of David to fulfill the prophecy. The Messiah had to come from the line of David. So in order to keep track of this line of David, it had to be kept track of. That doesn't make sense. But it was kept track of.
In order to be kept track of, it had to be kept track of.
That's right. Well, that's actually true. In order to know about it, it had to be kept track of. So Zerubbabel is the natural. If they weren't held captive, that he would have been the king. Okay, this is his job. He would have been the next king in line. So Zerubbabel is the natural leader to lead the first group of people back. So they go back. Okay, and here's what's cool. This is really, you get to see Ezra's job, like his main gig is chronicling, writing down events. And so he leaves a lot of details. He counts all these people. He counts even the donkeys and the animals that come. Look at verse 65 or 66. They took with them 736 horses, 245 mules, 435 camels, and 6,720 donkeys. So
What chapter is this?
this is chapter 2, verse 66. So Ezra is recording the number of people and animals that all went back. And also, this other cool thing that happens is with the Zerubbabel, like God has moved in this Persian king's heart in something amazing. He sends with them gold. He opens up all the stuff that Nebuchadnezzar stole from the temple and is like, here, this is yours anyway. Take it back with you. And so he supplies them. These are, he conquered Babylon, so these are now like his slave people, kind of. But they have remained separate. When we get to Daniel, we'll talk about how they remained separate. They didn't just get absorbed into the people of Babylon like they intended, and they get sent back. Yes, Henry.
Okay, so when they were taken from their home,
Yes.
everyone was taken. So
No,
they just
good question.
Okay,
So there are
I was
people
wondering.
still in Jerusalem. And when we get to Daniel, we'll see that they only took the beautiful and smart people. Because
Because I was
what? The
wondering.
Babylon... So none of us... Oh, no. No, just kidding.
Just like I
That's
was
awkward.
really worried.
Actually, all of you guys. That's what I meant. All of you guys would have been taken. So, because here's what the Babylonians were trying to do. This sounds like almost like Nazism, but they were trying to make a super race of people.
It is Nazism, Brian.
Yes, that's why I said it sounds like
it. It
Nazism,
is.
but it's not called Nazism. But they were trying to, as they conquered nations, they're like, we want smart brains and beautiful bodies in our
I was just worried they left giant
in our
cities.
genetic pool
They're
to
just-
increase our genetic superiority.
Yeah, they're like, we're ugly and dumb, so we need to put smart people in here so we're smart.
Well, no, they were the ruling nation. They thought great of themselves. They just wanted to improve their gene pool. And it's kind of crazy that they had this goal, but no, they didn't take everyone, only select people.
So they didn't just leave massive cities.
But no, they destroyed the cities, they burned the temple, they tore down the walls. There was just people like living poorly and for scraps. Yes,
I was
Betsy.
gonna say there's also strategy in leaving the weak ones there because they're not gonna rebel. They're
Right.
gonna try to rebuild the city.
Right. But it's different. It is different strategies. And you see these world conquerors have different strategies, and you see it in continuing history. When the Greeks took over, which is kind of next, they like forced everyone to follow Greek language and Greek ways. When the Romans took over, they let people do their own things to their own nations and just tax them like crazy. But so this is just different strategies as world conquerors. Anyway, so he sends them back. He empties all this gold and stuff that Nebuchadnezzar stole. It's really cool. Now, so that's the first return in the time. And then we have a second return, and that Ezra leads this one. So 458 BC. And then there's a third return, and that's the one with Nehemiah. Okay, so we won't get to that today. So our main characters. So there's kind of three kings here: Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes. Those are the Persian kings in Babylon. And then our main character, another main character is Zerubbabel. He's the Jewish king. And then our third main character is Ezra. Okay, Ezra is the scribe and then the leader of the second return. So he's recording these events and then is leading the second return.
How many people died on the first return? Like, they
Well, it's
come
in
back
here.
Again?
Look. Well, do we got a total? Can anyone find the
Oh,
total?
people did die.
Oh, sorry, what? People die? I think how many
Oh,
people
You're
returned?
saying that people are constantly returning, so I'm just thinking, so they all like. left.
So okay, there's a lot of Jews in Babylon. So there must have been a lot of smart, beautiful
so they had
Jews.
to-
And for
Like,
70
bring a
years,
load,
they
go
continued to
back.
have
And
children.
yeah, for 70 years they've been having babies. And they've been remained separate. They weren't like they didn't what King Nebuchadnezzar wanted to happen was they just get absorbed into the Babylonian people. But this is super important. We haven't gotten there to Daniel. But Daniel, if you know his story, first thing he gets there, young boy, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right?
Yes, the fire.
They are
bunnies.
like going to be trained as wise men, and they're going to eat food from the king's court and drink wine. And what does Daniel say no to? The wine and the meat that is not
Like,
like
I'm an
doesn't
Egyptian.
follow kosher Jewish laws. And so from that moment, Daniel sets up his friends, Jewish kids, Jewish people as separate. They do things differently. And that's like, well, why don't we have to do it if that was God's law? This was God's design to keep them separate, to keep them from just being absorbed into the rest of humanity, to keep them as God's chosen people, to produce the Messiah that would save the whole rest of the world. So they do not get absorbed into the Babylonian people. They stay separate. So there's a separate group of people in Babylon. Now, when King Cyrus makes this decree, not everyone goes back. Not some people are like, well, I have my business here,
And it's actually like
and I've established
it's-
here.
it's like decimated. Like going
Yeah,
back to
it
Jerusalem
is rough. It's
is
not
like
easy.
post-apocalyptic. Like go
Ooh,
back
fun.
and like put together the city,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like or try to live there. Sorry,
Yeah.
later we rebuilt like the walls.
So yeah, and then so more and more people come back, but not all of them ever do. Like Esther even remains even longer, and so not everyone goes back. Okay, so we've got our main events. We talked about them. With purpose. So the big purpose is to just record these events that happened on the return to Jerusalem in detail. Like Ezra is a detail guy. He's counting everything. He's a chronicler. He's writing it down so that we understand. And you know what? Like you read all these numbers, you're like, oh, boring numbers. But I think this gives, this is actually helpful to the accuracy of the Bible. It's not just a fairy tale that's like made up. Like they counted the people. These were real individuals that happened and went. Like if it helps to the accuracy and the reliability of the Bible when you see specific numbers. The fact that they counted the donkeys and the camels. They're not just like, oh, a bunch of people. Like, if you made up a story, like, I don't think you would go to this detail, right? Unless it really happened and you were chronicling it. So he recorded these events. And then we're going to see their very first effort is to restore the worship of God. So the thing about Judaism and what changed with Jesus is the Jews could only truly worship God in either the tabernacle or the temple. That's where they would have like local synagogues, which are like little churches where they would read the Bible, but like really only they would do the sacrifices at the temple, at the one location. So it was centralized to a special place. Now it's interesting, after the temple got destroyed, we were talking about this the other day, Jessica, why didn't they redo the tabernacle, which was a mobile thing, and they still haven't to this day ever reestablished the tabernacle as a place of worshiping God, but they're waiting to this day for that place to open up where they can rebuild the temple again for the fourth time, to rebuild the temple again and reestablish worship. There are literally still a council of Jews and people who are like in line to be the next high priest, and there's this whole like group ready to do it. And it, honestly, if you've read Revelation, this is gonna happen again, because Revelation refers to the temple being rebuilt and reestablished, and it's going to be all part of those end times events. So if you go there right now, the spot, I've been there, is owned by Muslims, and so they can't rebuild the temple there. But right outside that area on the Temple Mount, there's a group with all the things they need, the candles and the altar, ready to go and reestablish this. So they go back to reestablish the worship of God, which can, for them, only happen at a special place. They can pray and they can read scripture, but the sacrifice part of their worship of God only happens
And I
at
wonder
the
if he
temple.
will actually reinstitute it, or if it has just become like modern day Judaism. I'm just curious, honest question.
There are, what's the hardcore Jews? The Orthodox Jews, they would do that, I believe, if I understand. Yes.
Wait, so there are just like a group of Jews who just sit outside the Muslim border?
They don't just sit there, but there's like a established group, a secret society.
They're not
Like I
secret.
saw their sign. Josh Yates, our speaker at Snowblast, I went to Israel with him, and he pointed it out. He's like, that's the group that's ready to reestablish the temple worship.
Right, so
And they
like,
have a high priest chosen and all
the
that.
city has like some ups and downs, and so on a higher point in the city, there's the
I don't,
menorah out there, and it's covered
Yeah,
in
there's a
something
menorah
glass. And then you can see the Temple
it's,
Mount.
they have the
right
menorah,
there.
which is
It's
the
like
7 candle thing,
walk
and then
down
it's
the
right
hall,
there.
and
Like
they
there's
wanna-
a menorah candle thing on display. I don't know a whole lot about it, but it was really interesting. So they're going back to reestablish the worship of God with sacrifices and everything. Oh man, we're running out
I
of
know,
time.
Brian, I'm just moving on.
All right, so they first return under Zerubbabel. Oh, and then finally the other purpose, to continue chronicle the Davidic line, right? To maintain, look, Zerubbabel shows up again, and he's in the Davidic line for the Messiah to come. All right, main repents. They return to Jerusalem under Zerubbabel, under their king, who
Wait,
is their king in the line of David. We count all the numbers. Chapter 3, your heading. What does it say? What is the first thing they do?
I know. Someone say it.
Rebuild the altar.
They rebuild the altar so that they get right to the work of reestablishing the worship of God. This is great. Chapter 4, though, things get rough, right? Enemies oppose the rebuilding. They have trouble. This book is not like, it doesn't go perfectly according to God's plan. There's a lot of messy things. They actually have disagreements with the Jews that remained. They're like, we don't want you to help. Like, we just want to do it. It's like really messy, and you know how people are.
Wait,
and
there's still Jews that stayed. Oh yeah, only some got carried off to Babylon?
Correct. We talked about
So
that.
what is it like there?
I don't know. It's a mess. It's like not really. There's just kind of a mess. So they continue rebuilding, and then they rebuild the temple. Good things happen, and then a new king, and then time passes, and then it kind of dies down. A new king issues more decrees that more building should happen, and then finally the temple is dedicated, and the Passover on April 21st, the returned exiles celebrated the Passover. This is in chapter 6,
April
verse
21st?
19. April 21.
What would they call it? That they wouldn't call it April.
I don't know. That's translated here for us. Whatever the month is.
Who's got a different
So they purify themselves. They celebrate the Passover. Finally. And then Ezra, chapter 7, Ezra leads the next group. Okay, so now we have this is Ezra's now perspective. He was part of this, and he is doing the work. Now, the big problem Ezra faces, and then we're almost done with the book of Ezra. So Ezra leads this revival. We have the second return under Ezra. Ezra returns. Ezra leads this revival. The big problem is the intermarriage with the locals, okay? With the local people. And depending on, there's disagreements over this, okay? So I'm going to tell you two of the kind of perspectives here. The problem is, I don't see God dishing out these rules. I see the leaders dishing out these rules because of what they tell the people to do. Now, we do know that God wanted this people to remain separate. We've talked about that a bunch even today, right? They weren't supposed to, when they went into Canaan with Joshua, they weren't supposed to marry, because what happens when they marry their neighbors?
They get their neighbor's gods.
They get their neighbors' gods. They become deluded into worshiping other gods, and they don't remain Jews, essentially. So that was God's rule for them. Now when they go back, that rule would still apply. But what do you do if people have already, like the Jews who remained? And what do you do when they've already married someone? Maybe they have kids with them. What do you tell them to do?
Burn them.
No.
You tell them to divorce their wives and throw their kids out in the street?
No.
Is that the right thing to do?
No.
I don't think so. I don't think God would say, because I believe God hates divorce and divorce is a sin. So I don't believe God would say, do another sin to undo the sin you already did, right? And the New Testament principles on marriage, if you find yourself married to an unbeliever, which is similar, right? Like it would hurt your faith. It's difficult. I think the Bible teaches us to not marry, for Christians to not marry unbelievers. It's just not good for our faith. It's not good for the worship of God, right? But what does he tell people who have already found themselves, who are married to someone who's not a believer, and then they become a Christian? What does he tell them to do? Get divorced? What does Paul tell them to do?
Corrupt their.
Jessica.
If they're willing to stay married, stay married.
Yeah, stay married, and maybe they'll become saved, but don't divorce them just because you became a Christian, and remain as you are. So I believe that is what they should have done too. But Ezra and the other leaders throw down this rule that everyone who is married a foreign wife, even if they've had kids, should divorce them. So it doesn't go well. It not everyone does it. Some people do, it seems like, but other people find excuses like it's raining. I'm serious. They're like, it's raining too hard. We can't stand here and listen to this, and they leave. So it ends on a bad, kind of difficult note. And so these three returns, and the Bible Project is going to bring this out, kind of have this arc of, yes, let's go back. Let's rebuild the temple. Let's worship God. And then things get hard and things get messy, and then the leaders make difficult, hard decisions, and then people are like, we'll go do something else. And so there's like these three kind of arcs that we're going to see. Okay, we're going to watch just the first half of this Ezra video, because then we're going to watch the other half with Nehemiah next week. All right, so you see those arcs, you see the challenges, and going back, and then I think the human interpretation, and then like the kind of the disappointment that they kind of built it, and then God's presence doesn't seem to show up.
That's worst.
Yeah, it's
They
disappointing.
built
It's
this
tough.
temple to God that he didn't even come.
Yeah.
That shows that something's wrong.
Right. Yeah. I don't know
I want to
exactly
study that more.
what's wrong.
You gotta keep going, babe.
Okay. So how do we see Jesus in this book?
Zerubbabel.
Yeah, we see the messianic line of David, God preserving his messianic line to show us that the Messiah is still on its way in the line of Zerubbabel. What's a timeless truth we can pull out of this? I focused kind of, there's probably two ways you could focus on. To focus on the good parts of this, kind of that Bible probably leaves us kind of disappointed. I think it's amazing that God is sustaining and keeping his promises. And he's working through pagan kings. And he's giving them the gold and the items from the temple that were stolen years ago. Like, God is fulfilling his promises. So I like to put, the thing I came up with was, where God leads, he provides. And God is leading them back to Jerusalem, and he's providing everything they need through multiple kings, through multiple generations, continuing to give them what they need to rebuild, and stirring in the hearts of pagan kings, right? That Cyrus and Darius, that God is, or not Darius yet. Sorry, what's the other guys? Artaxerxes. Oh, Darius too. He's doing things, he's working in their hearts and doing in pagan kings who don't follow God, doing things shouldn't normal people want to keep their gold, right? But he's giving it away. It's kind of amazing. So, I don't know, anything else? Timeless truth? Yeah.
You could do listen to God, don't do it your own way, because everything was going good when they were listening to God. Then both times it ends and goes horribly the first time that they don't listen to God.
Right. Yeah, they seem to have their own ideas and not seek out God. And they have half of it right. Half truths are tough. Yes, God doesn't want them to intermarry, but then they're well, then we should undo that and divorce. And no, God also hates divorce. Following God is complicated, and we need to do what's right. But I really do not believe that God would ever tell us to sin, to undo our sin, right? He wants to lead us forward, and he's a redeeming God, and he takes our broken messes and brings good out of them. And God would never lead us to sin. So anytime, things go that way, and I don't know if there's other situations today, but yeah, like divorce is a great one. Like you find yourself married in a relationship that was maybe a bad choice. Like the New Testament teaches us very clearly that unless they take that initiative to leave you, the Christian, that you should not instigate that leaving. If they're fine staying married to you, stay married to them. Maybe they will come to know Jesus because of that, right? Like there's hope for restoration and redemption, not just like, oh, they're not a Christian, I need to get rid of them. Like, no, God would not tell us to sin to undo a sin. Yeah, Addie.
So why did how do you pronounce this?
Zerubbabel?
Why did he turn the other Jews away?
Yeah, it's so weird.
It is weird. It's kind of like they thought they were better.
Yeah, that's what
I think
got
so.
the impression.
Like they came back and these people were like poor probably, and then maybe they had intermarried and they're like, you're not one of us. We're the people. We're the chosen people. They got, I think it's pride and just looking at themselves and like, we came back to do this. We have the king. But like, I think God was foreseeing like the people to come back together, and it would have been a beautiful thing. But their pride, I think, gets in the way. Is what I would say. Yeah, it's really sad.
That could be time is truth.
Oh, time is truth. Don't let pride get in the way of God's plan. Whew! It's a good one.
I also like that God has a plan and also a plan He provides for it.
And we can't get in the way of God's plan. God's best for us. I don't know. Don't let pride, lead us astray, right? Because it does. We think we know better, right? We do that a lot. All right, that is the book of Ezra. Next week, I'm going to do a video because I'm going to be gone. So I'm going to record Nehemiah, and you're going to watch the YouTube live. No, it's not live.
You're gonna watch the YouTube.